Black Magic Woman podcast acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on. We also acknowledge traditional owners of the land where you, the listener or viewer, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to our elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was Aboriginal land and always will be Aboriginal land.
This episode is proudly brought to you by ANZ, a new series of conversations with different mob around the country to yarn about meaningful career opportunities within ANZ, building the capacity of Indigenous businesses and organisations, and helping individuals in the broader community to achieve financial wellbeing and resilience.
Welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast with Mundanara Bales.
Welcome to another deadly episode of the Black Magic Woman partnership with ANZ. We are showcasing some customers and clients and even employees, some of the deadly blackfellas that work at ANZ, talking about their experiences, their products, their services, and much, much more. Today, I am here with my bulla, Tom Mosby, who is actually the CEO of the Koorie Heritage Trust, or KHT. We're going to have a deadly yarn about his journey working at KHT. But before we get into it, I do want my listeners, but we got viewers now on YouTube. So hello to you, Mob, and thank you for subscribing and supporting the Black Magic Woman podcast, which is now on the iHeart network, and it's produced by Blackcast, the first Indigenous podcast network in Australia, backed by iHeart, the number one podcasting publisher in the world. So look, here we are on beautiful Wurundjeri country,
yes,
in Naarm, aka Melbourne. So the usual kind of way that I kick off a podcast is I hand over the microphone to you, and you can then introduce yourself in a way that you want our listeners and viewers to know who you are, where you come from, and maybe a little bit about where you grew up.
Okay. God, where do I start? So, grew up in the Torres Strait. Actually, I was born in the Torres Strait on Thursday Island. Went to primary school on Thursday Island on TI. Then my parents moved to Cairns when I started high school. So I went to Cairns State High School, did my high schooling there, finished year 12, then went to Canberra, to the University of Canberra, to do my first degree, which was in art conservation, art restoration. Then when I finished that, my first job was in WA at the Art Gallery of Western Australia. I was 19 when I actually started my first job, moved from the other side of the country.
I'm about to say that's a long way from
It
TI.
is a long way.
Then from Canberra.
Then from Canberra.
And then
to
over
Perth.
to the West Coast.
And it was, if I think back now, would I do it again? I don't know if I would. But, you know, when you're a kid,
19.
It's something that you just do.
Yeah.
So I did that, had a contract there for about 6 months, then moved to Melbourne for the first time. So this is 1989.
So in like the first 21 years of your life.
First 21 years, I'm travelling around.
Yeah, you've literally saw and lived and experienced 4 different states and territories.
Yeah. So I came to Melbourne, had a contract here at the National Gallery of Victoria. So that was 89, 90, working in conservation. Then went to Canada for 6 months, where I did an internship at the Canadian Conservation Institute. And again, I mean, that was pretty mind-blowing, eye-opening by then I was 19, 20. I actually turned 21 in Ottawa.
Wow. We're talking about pre-Mabo decision.
Pre-Mabo. Actually, I was in Canberra at the time when all of the court cases was happening. And I look back at it now and I think, God, I should have really been involved more when all of that was...
Yeah.
But it didn't really sort of register at the time.
You don't know what you don't know too, as a younger person. What's going on
with them
older fellas what they're yarning about.
And I remember one of the plaintiff, Father Pussy,
Yes.
he coming down to Canberra, and because there's a large Torres Strait community in Canberra, people like, Benny Mills, Paddy
Uncle Benny,
Mills, yeah.
big shout out to Uncle Benny and Yvonne.
All
they
them.
live down the road on the
so
sunny
there was
coast.
all of that sort
They're all
of family there, but it never really registered that this was happening. But anyway, so I went to Canada, 6 months in Canada, came back, didn't have a job. So I thought I'd go up to the Torres Strait onto Yam, where my family comes from. So my family, we're from the Central Eastern Islands. But in terms of my connection, it's really to the Central Islands. So I went back to Yam Island and didn't do anything. Well, I worked and sort of did things here and there for about 3 months.
You went back home.
Went back home, and it was just fantastic because having, gone from Cairns, Canberra, Perth, Melbourne, Canada, just going back home was just fantastic. And so I was there for 3 months, sitting on a coconut tree, having the best time, and then I was offered a job back here in Melbourne.
So you had to go again.
So
you got
I
itchy feet.
And I
sit
thought,
still.
okay, I need to actually, have a profession, develop my career. So I came back to Melbourne in 1991 and more or less have been here ever since. So, I mean, look, it takes a long time to be accepted into a community. I would like to think I'm accepted into Melbourne, but also, the local Aboriginal community as well. So, I mean, it's great having sort of, in a sense, grown up with connecting to families, connecting to, Wurundjeri, Bunurong, all of the aunties, uncles down here as well. So it's been a journey.
I was going to say, you got any other of your mob here?
TI
mob or even
not
immediate family? Which way?
No immediate. I mean, there is a Torres Strait community here, but it's not a big one.
Yeah.
And we do things, there is the Mazza sisters, Lisa and Rachel.
Yes.
They do a lot in terms of getting the Torres Strait Islander communities together.
Yeah.
So that's been fantastic.
What about the deadly sister who's a chef?
Nonny, yes.
Mabu.
Yeah.
So people that are watching or listening to this yarn, if you want to taste food,
Islander
ingredients, and homemade, home-cooked, Torres Strait meals, and some, like in terms of just, I went there, I've been there twice, and I literally was just blown away that, CBD, Melbourne, and there's an Indigenous restaurant that was packed.
Yeah, which is great.
You could not get a table. You had to book. And I sat there feeling so proud as a black woman, going, look at this. In 2023, because it was last year, this deadly sister has actually, she's made it.
Yeah. And it's actually great seeing the those businesses really happening, food businesses. There's a couple of First People Aboriginal caterers that we use as well. Because obviously I work at the Koorie Heritage Trust. One of the big things for us is about supporting all of our Aboriginal businesses, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander businesses. So there are caterers that we use as well. And seeing all of the rise of sort of those small businesses, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, for them to still be able to be operating after the pandemic. It was tough. Testing. It was tough. It was challenging. I heard 50% of Indigenous businesses in Victoria went under, completely under.
Yeah.
That's a lot of our mob.
It is a lot. It is a lot.
Then had to figure out alternatives with other businesses globally as well. But we're talking about the most vulnerable and marginalised peoples in Australia. 50% of Indigenous businesses during, and even after the pandemic, they've done some research. And I was just reading the Victorian black business kind of data, and I felt for the mob here.
Yeah.
I was going to say really quickly for our listeners and viewers that don't know anything about the deadly work that you fellas do at Koorie Heritage Trust. Tell us a little bit, like a bit of the history. How did it start?
Yep. So, look, it was formed in 1985. Uncle Jim Berg is the founder of the Koorie Heritage Trust. He worked with, we call them the two Ronnies. There was Ron Caston, who was one of the barristers, actually, as part of the Mabo Chase. And the other one was Ron Merkel, who's actually still alive. Unfortunately, Ron Caston has passed. The other Ron is still alive, and he used to sit on I think it was the Federal Magistrates, the Federal Court, is now a KC, King's Council. They founded the Koorie Heritage Trust in 1985, and it was really about protecting Victorian Aboriginal material culture, because at the time there's also all of this thing about human remains and human remains going overseas. It was all about really setting up something that would protect Victorian Aboriginal material culture. And it's developed ever since. And so I'm proud to say, 30 plus years later, we're still operating. We've expanded into an arts and cultural centre. So it's very much about, presenting temporary exhibitions, showcasing contemporary artists. But we also have a family history service, which is really important because it came out of the Stolen Generation anthology. So it's really about connecting the stolen generations back to family, back to community. We also have a shop, and we just stock Victorian Aboriginal products. So for us, it's all about showcasing that down here in Victoria, there is still a living, thriving First Nations, First Peoples culture. Because people come to Victoria, they think, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, they're all up north, up in Queensland, Northern Territory, Western Australia. But you actually have a very strong community in Victoria. And for us, it is really about profiling and showcasing that.
On that note, where are you located so people can come buy from the shop, experience in terms of the actual exhibitions, come and learn, experience our culture, meet other black fellas as well, because I'm sure you got staff there.
Yep. So we're located at Federation Square. So Fed Square, heart of the cultural precinct here in Melbourne. Melbourne, I would like to say, is I would like to think is the cultural capital of Australia. So we're in the Birrarung building. At Federation Square, it used to be known as the Yarra Building until a name change at the start of the year to actually recognise, we are located next to the Yarra River, but the traditional name is Birrarung. And when Fed Square was built, they named it with all of these European names, and they named our building the Yarra Building. And in recognition of country, of place, of traditional ownership, it's now been changed to the Birrarung Building. And I think for us, it's a really important part of that acknowledgement of our community. So we're in the Birrarung building at Federation Square.
And you offer there's walking tours?
We have walking tours. We also have cultural awareness training programs. So they're programs that we offer to all organisations. We have a large corporate base or the corporate community that come to us as part of their Reconciliation Action Plan about, working with their employees, all of that around cultural awareness.
And connecting them with Victorian black fellas and black businesses, traditional owners.
All that. But it's also about recognising, when you're working with Aboriginal people, whether as, as a colleague or as a client, that it doesn't sound right to say it's special, we're special, but it's acknowledging that there's a way of working with traditional Aboriginal communities.
Yeah, there are differences. There are cultural differences when you compare Western culture and Indigenous culture, whether it's Aboriginal, Torres Strait, African, Māori, right? There are cultural differences, and there are also cultural nuances as well.
Which comes out of that history of, colonialisation, settlement, all of the bad histories that we've gone through. We're all, as a contemporary community, trying to actually move forward, but there are still those nuances that I think businesses, corporates, whatever, need to be aware of if you're working with people, our people.
And especially if you've got a Reconciliation Action Plan, also known as a RAP, where you've got key deliverables. So you support organisations with those deliverables, the education, the awareness, utilising your conference rooms. So back in the day, we recommended to our clients that were based here in Naarm, we recommended utilising black businesses catering, but also conference or training spaces. So we wanted to take them out of their comfort zones, take them out of these big buildings, bring them into an Aboriginal space, and then do an introduction. In the lunch breaks, they would then wander through and look at the exhibitions.
Yes.
And I noticed so many people from the public and school kids were coming there as well. So then here I am as a visitor to this place, and I was starting to then go, oh my goodness, first I booked a conference or a training space. The catering that came, the fellas you used to as well, right? There's this relationship. And then I even met the late Uncle Jack Charles. As I was coming there to deliver training, I was with Greg Phillips. And the last photo I've got with Uncle Jack is outside KHT.
Oh, fantastic.
With my deadly brother, Professor Gregory Phillips. So the community people also utilised this space.
Yeah.
That's what I always say is important to a lot of our corporates, is that supporting Black businesses, Indigenous First Nations businesses, so that we don't have to rely on government funding. For corporates to use the same money that they would have spent on other event spaces that are all around here, how about looking for First Nations owned and operated? Because we know that for every $1 that they spend with an Indigenous business, it's $4.41 in terms of the social impact that's created. So for anyone looking for spaces, come to these fellas here, KHT, Koorie Heritage Trust, book your next conference, your team meetings, your offsite, your strategy days. You will not be disappointed. I haven't done the walking tour, but I did do the training.
Yeah.
I wanted to learn about Victorian Aboriginal culture and history because I was coming here so much, flying in, coming to the hotel, deliver the training, back on the next plane, and no time to just go and look at country, go and learn about the country, understanding the river right next to me.
Yep.
What is that name for that river?
Yep. Yep.
The totem system.
Yep.
Who are the elders?
Yep.
Where are the borders, the boundaries?
Yep.
So I started to look for my own kind of cultural or professional development.
Which I think is great, because I think it's, we offer it to corporates, we offer it to, non-Indigenous organisations, but it's hearing you talking about that, it's also about when you come from a different state. I mean, when Aboriginal people, Indigenous people come from somewhere else, to actually learn about community and place and country down here is also important, but also a really nice thing and a sign of respect for us. Because, coming from the Torres Strait, I still acknowledge, whenever I stand up to acknowledge country, I acknowledge that I'm on country, but I'm a visitor to this country. And I think for all of us coming into Melbourne, for us to actually acknowledge that and respect that is fantastic.
It's like an extension of a welcome to country. So how can we package up, as really deadly successful Black businesses and enterprises that are based in different states and territories? How can you package up your local, your local history as a training package that's an extension of a smoking ceremony or a welcoming, but it's offered to First Nations visitors and people that have been here and living here. They might be here for 40 years, but still didn't know that their Boonwurrung or their Tanarong or their Jar Jar Wurrung. And now these mob are from there. And this is the relationship that, or maybe good relationship, maybe not good relationship. So just understanding some of that history will let you know then, if you're trying to engage with local mob, do you have the same mob in the same room at once? There's a lot of learning for us as Black fellas as well, living and working with these different organisations.
And also, the one thing that we find at the KHT as well, we have a collection. We have an amazing collection of both historical and contemporary artworks. And it's a resource there for our Indigenous artists that can come in and actually go through the collection and learn about, especially with the historical work that we have, learn about, traditional techniques, traditional design, design, because we acknowledge that places like, Victoria, New South Wales, Tasmania, there's a much longer history of settlement than other parts of Australia, and there's a much greater loss of that cultural knowledge. And so for us, being the sort of custodian of the material heritage that can actually help people rediscover, I think is really important.
Rediscover and reconnect. That's so important for mob, isn't it? That they find the opportunities and the right organisations where they feel that they can come in and sit there, have a cup of tea.
Yep.
That's what I noticed when I was there. Yeah. This sense of belonging and community. We were having a cup of tea and I thought, Jesus is dead. Like, this would not have happened in one of those corporate buildings. I would not have bumped into another black fella.
Yeah, and it's always really exciting when we see that people actually connecting in the space.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And I think the physical space as well. I mean, we're trying to create, we're obviously in a building that was designed by a non-Indigenous architect and built about 20 years ago. But what we've tried to do internally when we've actually refitted the building is to actually represent Victorian Aboriginal design values, but also contemporary design values as well. It's really about showcasing that. So when people come into the space, they actually see a space that reflects where we as First Nations people living in Victoria, where we are today. People come in and, I mean, we still struggle with that. People still come in thinking we're going to walk into an Aboriginal space, we're going to see dot paintings everywhere, we're going to see all of the iconography from up north, whereas this is really about saying, no, sorry, this is Victoria, and it's an education for you. Coming into this space, seeing this physical building, it's about educating you around what we have in Victoria.
Well, how did you end up doing business with ANZ? That's what I'm curious about. I know ANZ do some really deadly things in our community. They support a lot of Indigenous businesses. They've got their Indigenous business bankers now, because I've got one, which is pretty deadly. So how did ANZ and KHT first kind of take off or hit it off?
ANZ was a partner with the KHT years ago, so even before I started. So when I started, ANZ was, and we had really great support from ANZ, and then that relationship sort of dropped off, and we reconnected after COVID. It's like a relationship. We reconnected after COVID, and they were really keen to look at how they can support the KHT in terms of achieving our vision, but at the same time, by supporting us, it was also reaching into their reconciliation action plan as well. And so we, like I said, reconnected after COVID and have developed a fantastic relationship where they support our exhibitions program, our temporary exhibitions program. And that for us is a really big thing, because we really, even though over 50% of our revenue is self-generated and we get funding from elsewhere, that type of corporate funding for us is really important, especially in that exhibitions and public programming space, because they're all project by project. And at the same time, we're able to give back to ANZ, things like cultural awareness training, tours, the use of our meeting rooms and spaces. So there's a reciprocal relationship.
I was going to say the same thing, right? In our culture, reciprocity.
Yeah.
It's so important, that you give, you take, you give back, and make sure that it's mutually beneficial.
Exactly.
So ANZ are a leader in reconciliation. They're a bank, they're very big, got a lot of influence with their customers and with their employee base and with the whole community that they're part of as well. So they're creating like societal change. They're part of this kind of, when you think about the reconciliation movement, even bigger than that, because they're basically putting their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. I agree exactly. It's not just us taking that corporate dollar. It's how do we actually work with ANZ to support them in terms of, recruitment of First Nation employees, First Nation customers as ANZ customers. They're a really important thing, because it's also acknowledging within the corporate structure, as First Nation people, and this goes back to that cultural awareness, the nuances of dealing with employees and a customer base that isn't used to saving, isn't used to all of that sort of Western banking tradition.
Yeah.
But we need to, as a people, we need to be part of that. And I think it's very important.
Especially if we want to be part of and contribute to the economy.
Yeah. But also be successful in the economy as well.
And I think, a lot of financial institutions, a lot of them, superannuation, banks, insurance companies, all these, they're really big kind of institutions, they're big businesses. And our mob that might work in there might feel quite isolated, they might feel alone. Because we are a minority in this country.
We are.
And we could be definitely a minority within a much bigger team, and having an opportunity, to know that, hey, our organisation supports First Nations enterprises, community initiatives, those on-country cultural immersions for Victorian people to actually connect to this country and create that sense of belonging. That's got to be a good thing, especially for our mental health.
I completely agree. And it's understanding us and our values. So, the two of us, we cross both worlds. We're coming to live in big cities, all of that. But I think of my family up north still living on remote islands, villages of 100, 120 people, but they still have banking needs. They still have needs that actually, but how do you actually, as big corporate organisations, how do you actually work with those?
How do they extend their reach? How do they get to those communities? And that's why this partnership, to me, is so important, that people like ANZ invest in this podcast, which platforms and gives opportunities for you, Mob, KHT, you as a Torres Strait Islander man. It gives you an opportunity to showcase what you do, and then talk to our audience, our listeners, about how they can then get involved. How can they support you? What would be the best way for people to get in contact with you? Is it easy just to go kht.com.au? How do they
get online? Website, it's kht.com.au. Everything's online, so check out our website, all of our email addresses, telephone numbers there. Please, or just drop in, go to Fed Square. We're actually just off the main plaza, so when you're walking up the main plaza, we're on the right, directly opposite Acme. It's so central, easy to get to.
Yeah. Well, if I could say, working with ANZ, just to give other people a bit of an insight into how that relationship, is there one thing there that you just, really proud of with this relationship, or is there someone in particular that has just gone above and beyond for you fellas to support you today that you want to give a mention to? Or?
I think, it's all of our corporate partners that are very important, like I said, to our success. So the support we get from ANZ, that enabled us to present. At the moment, we actually have an exhibition by a young kid called Josh Muir, who was a rising star in the art world, but suffered, as most of our sort of young kids do, but also our young boys especially, mental health, went up and down, and unfortunately passed away about 2 years ago. He was only in his 30s, but he was exhibiting at the National Gallery of Victoria as part of White Night in 2016, projecting onto the facade of the National Gallery of Victoria. We're doing a retrospective of his artwork, working with his partner and mother, which has been the best experience. And we've presented, and it's on at the moment, this amazing exhibition that just looks at this creative talent who left us too early. But we can only do that with the support from corporate partners.
And, without ANZ, this exhibition might not have happened for a bit longer, but was able to happen.
Was able to happen.
And it's happening right now.
Yeah, and it's happening right now.
Too deadly. Well, I am really excited for the fact that our mob can hear this yarn, but I'm even more excited that more mainstream Australians that listen to Black Magic Woman, maybe on the iHeart app, might be a customer of ANZ that now know, you know what, this is a deadly bank. I'm going to keep banking with them. So look, Bella, I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure to see you again, to catch up, to have you on the couch and to hear about the deadly work you fellas are doing with ANZ at the Koorie Heritage Trust.
And right back at you. This is great. Fantastic.
I can't wait to come check out the new space.
Yep.
So on that note, you fellas, I really do hope that you share this podcast because not many people know about the deadly things that we do in our communities. So Black Magic Woman is where it's at. So on that note, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Until next time, bye for now.
If you'd like to know more about how ANZ can help improve your financial well-being or help you start, run or grow your business, visit anz.com or call 131314.
A big shout out to all you Deadly Mob and allies who continue to listen, watch and support our podcast. Your feedback means the world. You can rate and review the podcast on Apple and Spotify or even head to our socials and YouTube channel and drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. The Black Magic Woman podcast is produced by Clint Curtis.